our DMs are filled with parents who, and I get it, like it's hard being a parent. And I think that, in this day, especially, we have so much more information than our parents had before us. But I just wish that parents didn't stress perhaps so much on the things that really don't matter as much, and are sort of taking that long view approach instead of that day-to-day, meal-to-meal hyper focus that I think kind of takes a lot of the joy out of feeding.
You are listening to Veggie Doctor Radio, and this is episode number 151. Welcome to Veggie Doctor Radio. I am your host, Dr. Yami, board-certified pediatrician, certified lifestyle medicine physician, certified health and wellness coach, author, speaker, mother, wife, and human being. I passionately believe in the power of diet, habits, and mindset in sparking and sustaining well-being and joy in our lives. This podcast combines expert interviews and thoughtful monologues to explore plant-based nutrition, lifestyle medicine, parenting, mindset, and other exciting and fun topics. I hope that these episodes inspire you, uplift you, and equip you with the knowledge and tools to live your best life. Are you ready to get started? Let's do it. Well, hello, veggie lovers. Welcome back to Veggie Doctor Radio. I have a really great episode for you today, especially if you're a parent and you want to learn more about micronutrients and how to feed your plant-based baby and toddler. We have on the show today Whitney English and Alexandra Gaspero, who are registered dietitian nutritionists, and they are going to be talking about their new book, The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler. Just a reminder that the information on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only, so it's not meant to replace careful evaluation and treatment by your healthcare professional. So if you have concerns about you or your child's eating, nutrition, or growth, please talk to their doctor. So Whitney and Alex are registered dietitian nutritionists, certified personal trainers, moms, and the founders of the Plant-Based Juniors community. PBJs is your complete guide to plant-based prenatal and pediatric nutrition. They are authors of First Bites, the predominantly plant-based pregnancy guide, and the Plant-Based Baby and Toddler. Now, this new book, The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler, is set to be released May 11th of 2021, but you can pre-order now. Pre-orders are open wherever books are sold, but if you go to their website, Plant-Based Juniors, you can get bonuses if you pre-order. So you're going to get 5 extra bonus recipes, but also what's even more amazing is that they have arranged for discounts that can add up to hundreds of dollars. So essentially, if you're going to buy some of these things already, like some supplements, special gear that you might need for feeding your baby, like bibs and plates and those kinds of things, then the book is going to essentially pay for itself. So go on over to plantbasedjuniors.com, go to where it says books, and the first one, The Plant-Based Baby and Toddler, and it'll take you to the page where you can sign up for your bonuses. So pre-order now. Book is not released until May 11th, but if you pre-order, you get extra goodies. So if you're going to get the book anyway, do it now. Get on the pre-order list. You're going to love this book, especially if you have a baby or a toddler, or planning to have a baby or a toddler. So if you're a pregnant plant-based mama, this book is for you as well. So what do we talk about in this interview? We talk about why they wrote this book, why they're raising their families in a predominantly plant-based way, and what that even means, what they think parents worry about the most when it comes to feeding their kids, what is the biggest misconception about raising a plant-based child, what parents might worry about that is unnecessary when it comes to feeding their children. We talk about choline and we talk about vitamin A because those are hot topics right now in the plant-based community. And then we talk about what micronutrients they recommend supplementing and how we can find out more about that. They have a special free guide through their website as well, and how you can find quality and reliable supplements, and, lots of great positive tips. I think if you are a plant-based parent, you're going to leave this episode feeling good, feeling reassured, empowered, and knowing where you can find the information so that you can raise your plant-based child in a confident way, not worried that they're going to be missing stuff, and, cover your bases. So without further ado, I can't wait for you to listen in to my conversation with Whitney and Alex from Plant-Based Juniors. Whitney and Alex, the very famous, wonderful, fantastic, amazing Plant-Based Juniors, dietitians. Welcome to Veggie Doctor Radio.
Thank
What
you.
a nice intro. Thank you.
Well, I do feel like y'all are superstars. I mean, for real. Okay, I'm just going to say,
Same.
You're both beautiful, and all of your children are all beautiful. And, just everybody's so photogenic, and the food. Like, my question is, before we get into the rest of these very important questions, which one of you is willing to adopt me as your child so that I can eat the food that you feed your kids? Because I would be totally happy with that.
You're going to want to move in with Alex. She is the expert chef.
That's probably true. But also, I was going to say, you don't know what we do to our sweet children to get them to smile. Like, the behind the scenes is also comical for the photo shoots we do, where it's like, yes. So
a lot of the time it looks like they're smiling and laughing, and they're actually bawling.
You should totally do a behind the scenes, like what it took to get this picture of your. Oh, but they're so cute though. I love them, and they're
it's
little
so funny.
hands.
I actually sent a picture to Alex once, and you know how you can hold it down and you can see what was like actually happening, and it's like me running into the frame, like shaking Caleb so he'll smile. She's like, oh, that's how you get him to smile.
But it worked, and it was a cute photo.
So it was worth it, right?
It worked. Yeah, we do a little
these are
gallop
the
into
secrets,
the frame.
the secrets of PBJ.
I love it. Okay, so you guys just wrote a fabulous book. I'm so honored to have been able to read a version of it. What a great resource. Thank you so much for writing this. I want to hear from each of you. Why did you write this? I know that it was many years in the making. So tell me how this idea even started.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I mean, I think that, honestly, it was the book that really is the reason that PBJs exist. It was the resource that Whitney and I were looking for and couldn't find. When we both became pregnant and were starting to really think about raising our kids, we felt like the things that were out in the market currently were either, something that was like, don't worry about it. If you're plant-based, you don't have to worry about a thing. Everything kind of takes care of itself. Or it was, you can't raise your kids this way. You have to introduce animal products. And we just felt like, we know that neither one of those things are correct, but we couldn't find sort of the evidence-based resource that made us as dietitians feel confident and empowered. So we really set out to write the book that we were looking for. And I'm happy to say we did.
Yay.
I'm a very obsessive type A dietitian. So when I want to know the answer,
yes, she is.
Very obsessive. When I want to know the answer to something, I will dig deep into the research. And there were a few questions that I had both during pregnancy and while raising my son that I absolutely could not find an answer to in any available lay literature. So I went down the rabbit hole to get to the bottom of some of these issues. And the fact that it was so hard for me to find what should be pretty simple answers to pretty basic questions that all plant-based parents need to know showed us that there was no good place for people who aren't nutrition experts to go to get these answers. So that's why we were like, we got to put this information out there.
Do you feel like the personality type of a dietitian is like that anyway? Like, do you feel like dietitians like numbers and like you're a little bit more detail oriented?
Detail oriented, yes.
100%.
Which is good. I'm glad you exist. I'm glad you exist.
Somebody's
and so
gotta
thank
do
you
it.
for doing that background work for us, because I'm not that kind of person. So, okay. So let's take a couple of steps back and talk about why each of you have decided to go down this road anyway for yourselves and your own families and children.
Sure. So I went predominantly plant-based. That's the term that Alex and I use about 6 years ago. Prior to that, I was a protein and animal protein obsessed fitness junkie who really didn't know anything about nutrition. And then I went back to school and got educated. And it was in my program that I learned about the massive amount of research supporting a plant-based diet, and really all different types of plant-based diets for longevity and chronic disease prevention. And so that's what turned me. And since going predominantly plant-based, I've learned so much more about the ethical side of this way of eating, about animal cruelty, about climate change, about the environment. And that's all factored into my decision to eat this way and to raise my family this way as well.
Yeah, and I'm pretty similar. I mean, I've never been a huge meat eater. In college, I sort of dabbled in vegetarianism in high school, and then really in college is when I decided to stop eating meat. And funny enough, when I met my husband, his parents are dairy farmers. He's from Wisconsin, and so when I met them, I mean, I think my mother-in-law was like, "Wait, you don't eat what?" She had no idea what to do, and my husband was very heavy, like meat and protein, meat and potatoes sort of person. And over the years together, I mean, that was 14, 15 years ago, we've both sort of adapted this way. He now has completely cut out all meat. He still eats a little bit of cheese, but anyways, I knew from that it was sort of a no-brainer that we would raise our kids this way. Just sort of for all the reasons Whitney said. I feel like, especially at this time in this life, we can't just focus on human health, but planetary health is also so important. And especially sort of raising this next generation, it just feels like, this is so aligned with what I believe and also the world I want to leave for my children. So this is the right path for us.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like whichever route you come to it from, you learn about the other things too, Totally. So I think a lot of us, especially in this space, we came to it because of the health reasons and the literature and the evidence showing that this was a good way to live a long, healthy life. But it's almost impossible not to learn about everything else associated with it. And then you just have more mental space after that. You make that first step, and then you have this mental space that you learn about all these other issues as well. So you're very careful to say predominantly plant-based. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so predominantly plant-based is a term that we coined really to encompass the evidence that shows that all walks of plant-based lifestyles are beneficial for human health. So the research shows that vegans, vegetarians, flexitarians, pescatarians, no matter what kind of plant-based diet you follow, there are health benefits, and it is superior to eating a traditional animal heavy diet. And as Alex just stated, we are not in this just for nutrition. We're also in this to save the planet, just that lofty goal. And again, the research really supports that we need everybody eating less animal products. We need everyone to reduce their meat intake. So while we totally commend people who can make the jump to a fully plant-based diet or a vegan diet, which is an ethical term actually instead of a nutrition term, we want to be as inclusive as possible to really make that global change, to really get more people on board. Because if we're going right out the bat and suggesting people go completely plant-based, it's just not as successful from what we know from studies of diets, that people who take a black and white approach to most eating patterns often are unsuccessful in the long term. So, we think a slow approach, like you just detailed, making baby steps, adding to your breadth of knowledge about the topic, and going as far plant-based as that takes you, can be a good approach for most people.
Alex, did you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I think she summed it up well. I think it's sort of like the wider net sort of catches more people. And I think that especially for when we come at it from a raising children point of view, I think if you're sort of like, I've heard about the health benefits of plant-based eating, I sort of seen over and over again this sort of predominant plant-based pattern and how beneficial it is for so many aspects of chronic disease and just overall health, but not quite sold on raising my kids quote unquote vegan or 100% plant-based. I think that it's much more appealing to say, oh yeah, I can eat this way, most of the time, or I don't have to worry so much when they're over at grandma's house or when they're, at daycare or whatever. I think it's just a more inclusive way. And we found that when we talk to our readers, there we definitely have a lot of vegan or strict plant-based eaters, but we also have a lot of people who just say, I'm really curious in this way of eating. I know I want to do more of this, and I know I want to do this sort of for the whole family.
Yeah. And even your book, you talk about what the literature shows and what the evidence is anyway, that there's no evidence shows that you have to be 100% this way in order to have health benefits and also planetary benefits, and all that stuff, aligns with that as well. But I agree. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think animal sort of ethics and welfare aside, I think that for a lot of people, it feels like, okay, that means if I eat this way for most of the time, but I don't have to completely quote unquote give up, the occasional animal-based food, I think that is a much more palatable response for a lot of people. And, like Whitney said, like we've got to move fast. Especially when we think about what the UN reports are coming out and all of the, sort of scary climate science that we're seeing. I wish that we were sort of further along as a population, but we're not. And we know actually that meat intake tends to increase depending on sort of what population that you're looking at in the past couple of years. So I think that really sort of having this message of more plants more often is just resonates with the larger population.
And at the end of the day, there are just so many unknowns in science in general, but specifically in nutrition science, which is a young science. But one thing that everyone can agree on is that more fruits and vegetables are more beneficial. More plants are more beneficial. This is something that's indisputable and that we can all get on board with.
And I just really love meeting people where they are. Because for some of us, it's realistic to be able to go 100%. Like we have the resources, we have the knowledge, we have access. And for some people, it's not. And so giving them a place where they can feel the self-efficacy to be like, wow, I'm only eating meat twice a week now. And I used to eat it 3 times a day. I mean, that could be a huge deal for them. I also found that some people with different personality types hate labels. Like they just don't want to be labeled in any way. My dad's one of them. He's downstairs, so I can't talk too loud. But anyway, he doesn't want to call himself any of those things. And so some people may just be like, I don't eat much meat, or I eat a lot of plants, and they don't really want to say I'm plant-based or I'm vegan or I'm any of these terms, reducitarian, pescatarian, whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think we have to realize that everybody's different, and how can we create something so that we can reach common goals for our health, for the planet, for the animals, and just for happiness and well-being. Because I'm all about feeling good.
It takes the factor of shame out of it.
Yes.
For a lot of people, when they start a new eating pattern, they're either on or they're off. And that creates a lot of shame when you eat a food that's so-called off your diet, and causes most people to completely go in the opposite direction, to backfire. I can't tell you how many times I've been, I used to be vegan. I used to be vegetarian. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be one way or another. Why don't we just start a pattern of eating, and it can ebb and flow based on your lifestyle?
Yes. I love that so much. It's so true. Okay. Raising kids is a whole nother thing though. I mean, like, as both of you know, we have ourselves, we can handle ourselves. We're cool. There's still the distress that comes with feeding yourself. You have kids and it's like to the next level. Anxiety, fear, anger, they're every emotion.
All in one
joy.
hour.
Of course, joy. It's funny. It's fun too. But one thing that I love about your account is that you do work with parents, and then you help them. You help guide them through this. So, but first of all, I want to know, with your experience, what do you think parents worry about the most when it comes to raising plant-based kids?
I think it's the same as if you're raising omnivore kids. I think sometimes we take this line of like, well, if you're plant-based, if you're omnivore, but a lot of times the concerns, especially the nutrient concerns and just parental concerns are the same. And that is making sure you're raising your kids, quote unquote, healthy, right? And there's a lot of ways that can be. But I think that so many parents, and I think especially when we look back on sort of our own childhood, we have so many parents who will say things like, I was so picky for so long, I don't want that for my child. Or, I ate this way for so long and I don't want that for my child. And I think a lot of times it's sort of that course correction, but also just, how do we sort of get them started on the right foot? And I think that's true for an omnivore or a plant-based parent.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think the biggest misconception is about raising plant-based kids specifically?
I think one of the biggest irrational fears that we hear is that they're not going to get enough protein. Would probably be one of the top concerns. And I don't know if you've covered this on the podcast before, but that's just a ridiculous claim when you look at the nutrient composition of plants and realize that protein, all 9 essential amino acids to be specific, are found in really every single whole plant food. And that it takes a mere 2 cups of soy milk to meet the protein needs for a 1 to 3 year old toddler. And that's without even taking into account their food for the day. So that's one that we get a lot. And then other various nutrients.
Yeah, I think the other thing, and I kind of alluded to it in the beginning, but I do see this a lot in the plant-based community, is this idea that, if you're plant-based, you don't have to worry. And I think that one thing that we try to really talk about with parents is, look, well-planned diets, every child needs to be on a quote-unquote well-planned diet, right? I mean, just because you're eating McDonald's and, fruit snacks doesn't mean necessarily you're getting all the nutrients you need because you're including animal products. But at the same time, just because you're eating a more plant-based diet doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting all of the nutrients you need either. And I think sometimes we really try to educate around the idea that supplements are not 4-letter words, especially if your child is not eating certain things. A lot of our foods are naturally fortified. And if your child is not eating those things, you need to find either a plant-based fortified source or a supplement. And that does not mean that you are not doing it, quote unquote, right. But, we do need to be aware of certain nutrients and they can be harder to find, especially with smaller bellies and, smaller preferred appetites, right? I mean, my son's not going to eat 3 cups of broccoli a day to get all of his calcium from that, even though he could, if he was, if he was willing to do that. He's just not. If I can get him to eat a half cup, that's a win. So, not being afraid of fortified options just to make sure that you are getting the nutrients you need. And that does not mean that you're quote unquote failing or that you're doing it wrong. It just means that you're being a really good advocate for what your child needs.
Yeah. Recognizing that even omnivorous diets have supplementation involved, whether you know it or not. Whether it's that vitamin D that's fortified in the cow's milk that you're providing or the iodine that got into that cow's milk one way or another. Mm-hmm. So
I love that you guys brought this up because when I started my Nutrients of Concern series last year, I went over fortification because it's been part of the American food system for so long that we take it for granted and it's invisible to us, right? Yes. And what I didn't realize, because, I live in the United States, is that not all countries do this, but we've been doing it since the 1920s and putting things into food that we just assume would have been there. And it's not. Vitamin D is a good example. Iodine's a good example, but even things like iron that I know you guys talk about in your book. So I think it's important for people to know that because otherwise there's this whole it's natural, it's not natural argument, which I think is kind of moot anyway, because there's a lot of things that are natural, including death when you're a baby. You know what I'm saying? So we don't necessarily always want to do what's natural.
Sanitation. We have an entire section in our intro that covers that whole argument about it's not natural, and we go through one by one talking about the specific nutrients and what their natural origins are. And the ultimate conclusion that we come to is that, like you said, it's a moot point. Does it matter if it's natural or not? Nothing in our modern society is natural anymore. What matters now is that it's doable, it's sustainable, it's healthy, and it's beneficial for both people and the planet. So whether or not our caveman ancestors were doing it exactly the way we're doing it now, it doesn't matter. We don't need meat anymore. We're not having a hard time finding food. The reverse is true.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I want to go live in a cave right now. I love air conditioning. I love it. I love my fireplace and showers. So
I love my Netflix.
So there's a lot of things that, and so basically that being said, it's just to help people feel a little bit better about how we do that it doesn't make you a bad mom to use fortified foods. It doesn't make you a bad mom to supplement things. You know, we can't be expected to be able to meet everything just by eating fruits and vegetables or whatever, you know? So thanks for bringing that up.
We wouldn't have so many nutrient deficient toddlers if it was that easy to meet nutrient needs just through diet.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about, as far as like other things that you see that parents worry about. You kind of touched on this, Alex, that, you know, kids sometimes don't eat very much or eat more some days than others. Do you find that parents worry unnecessarily about how kids eat or how kids eating changes over time?
Yes. I mean, I'm a parent too, right? I've got a toddler who, I mean, he's 3.5, and I don't think anyone who's ever fed a 3.5-year-old for a long period of time would call it like easy breezy. You know, I mean, there are fun, different, unique challenges and fun things, you know, depending on the day. But I think that a lot of times what we hear from our parents is like, you know, at this meal, he didn't eat this, or he didn't eat enough, or and it's like, look, nutrition essentially is a long game, right? I mean, my child might not get quote unquote the amount of iron that he needs in one day, but that's okay. You know, he might make it up the next day, or, you know, it's really about sort of what is the usual pattern. And that's really what we try to tell parents is it's what matters most of the time that matters. You know, it's not these individual meals. I think the other night my son only had like, you know, 1 bite of his avocado toast and like 10 strawberries for dinner. Is that nutritionally complete? No. You know, is that anything that I'd be like, oh, this is sort of what I would recommend all parents to be? No. But that's what happened. That was, you know, what his appetite was. And I think that it's really about sort of like letting that stress go and also knowing like what your role is. We talk a lot about the division of responsibility in feeding in our book. And I think to me, it's just sort of this really big like aha of what I'm responsible in doing and what my child is. And as long as I know that I'm meeting his needs as far as offering healthful foods, offering them often, offering them at set meals and snack times, I don't have to stress so much about how much he's eating and what foods he's trying to put into his body.
Yeah, you really got to take a global perspective. Take a look back at the totality of the diet. And I will say as a caveat, if your child is not growing according to their growth curve, or if they have a diagnosed nutrient deficiency, that's a different story. But if your child is healthy, they're growing properly, their pediatrician is giving you the thumbs up, then you don't need to be obsessing about every single plate. You're going to miss the big picture.
Yeah. And Whitney brings up a good point too. You know, we don't want to necessarily generalize because there are pediatric issues that happen, and we want to make sure we're sort of catching them early. If your mom gut or parent gut is sort of telling you like, something's really changed, he's liking less and less foods, he's not eating very much, then obviously we want you to discuss that with your pediatrician. But sort of for the average child who is growing according to their growth chart, a lot of these things, sort of the day-to-day things, we just don't worry about too much as long as the overall shift is positive.
And the problem when you get too obsessive about individual meals and picky eating in general, which I'll say research shows is completely normal. The majority of kids from actually 2 to all the way up to 6 years old are going to experience picky eating. When you obsess too much about the specific plate, then your behavior starts to change. And you start putting pressure on your child, whether or not you want to and whether or not you know it. And that is going to defeat your ultimate goal in the long run. So like Alex said, it's a long game. You may get them to eat all of their nutrients that are on that plate in that meal. But what is going to happen long term is that they're going to be pushing back against that, pushing back against you and your feeding patterns. And when you're not there to force feed them all of their nutrients at each meal, they're not going to choose to eat them on their own. So we're really working not only to implement proper nutrition, but to instill positive behaviors that will carry over throughout their life.
And now for a very important message. Hey, veggie lover, if you are looking for free resources to guide you on your plant-based and healthy living journey, go to dryami.com/free for tons of free downloadable PDFs. Hundreds of people have taken advantage of my tips to help them reduce meat and dairy consumption, navigate eating out, and build satisfying plant-based meals. Download one or download them all, and don't forget to share with friends and family. dryami.com/free. And now back to the episode.
And feeding should be fun. Mealtime should be fun. I can't imagine any of us want to sit down with someone who's, overly anxious about what we're about to eat, or look at us every time we put something in our mouth and say, "Did you like it? Do you want more? Is it good?" I mean, that's awful. That's not a positive experience. And so I think that if we can just sort of say, like, look, let's step back, let's let your child sort of like play and explore and have those experiences when it comes to feeding. Yes, it's about nutrition, but also healthy eating is also about your sort of, healthy relationship with food and enjoying coming to the table and enjoying those foods and not feeling like, oh yeah, my mom always used to make me eat that. That sort of comes into that power struggle and rebellion.
And I will acknowledge that you may have to become an actress because, as I said in the beginning, I'm an anxious type A dietitian. And so I might want to cheer every time my son tries a veggie that he wouldn't before, or cringe when he completely throws a meal off his plate. But, I got to keep that stonewall face going, not let him know what's going on underneath.
Yeah. And I tell parents, because it's hard, we're all moms here. So we know that sometimes that mom look comes out. So I tell moms at the beginning when they're practicing this, sometimes you have to get up from the table and be like, oh, I forgot something in the kitchen, and go take a deep breath and come back,
And we're not saying this is easy. We're in there too. We know, God, there's so many times I just want to be like, eat it, just take a bite. But, I just have to not. And so I say that meaning like we know this advice is sometimes harder to implement than it sounds, but it really is the best approach.
But also for each mom to give herself grace. My kids are already 11 and 16, and it does not completely go away. I'm sorry to tell you guys. So, but it gets easier, and with practice, you get better at it. But I say the same as y'all. What I tell my families is it's not meal to meal or even day to day. It's more week to week and month to month. The overall structure, the overall balance, the overall intake of your diet. Because as a pediatrician, I know how many things changes appetite too. Like when kids get sick and they get a cold, parents freak out. They're not eating. It's okay. It'll rebound. Just keep them hydrated. I say it all the time. Then their appetite comes back and they're just like monsters. Like they're putting stuff down. And when they go through growth spurts, when my older one went through a growth spurt, I didn't know how to keep enough food in the house, like so much intake. So some of that is about trusting them. And that's where that division of responsibilities, intuitive eating, but also going back and learning how to trust ourselves. Because the more I've learned how to trust my own appetite, the more I've realized, during the month, as my cycle changes, there's some days I'm not that hungry. And some days I need to eat almost twice what I did the day before. And it's not because there's something wrong with me. It's because that is what my body is asking me to do. Totally. Our kids do the exact same thing. So whenever you start tuning into your own body, you realize it fluctuates. And that's why their appetite fluctuates too. Or if you're just like really active one day, and you know how kids are, they never stop, So
yeah, and Alex and I talk about this in the book. Like you can't give your child what you don't have yourself. This is Alex's favorite quote.
It is my favorite
If you don't have a positive relationship with food yourself, you're not going to be able to give that to your child. And we have a whole section about different parenting styles and how we were both raised with authoritarian parents. We love you, moms. But they were authoritarian and, they pushed the fruits and veggies on us. They were very obsessive and we're working to course correct and not implement that same type of tactics ourselves.
Yeah. And it's all done through love, right? I mean, I think we all do the best we can with what we have right now. And in the past, our parents and grandparents did. And we just learn a better way and we practice a better way and we do the best we can moving forward. That's all great information. Thank you so much. Well, let's move on to a couple of nutrients that I want to hear from my type A detail-oriented experts, please, so that I know how to answer these questions the next time I get asked on a podcast. So the first one is choline. Why is this a concern? Since when has this been a concern? And what do I need to be worried about? Because I don't even know what to worry about when it comes to choline. Of course, we know studies with eggs and TMAO and all this stuff. So tell me what we need to know about choline, when we need to worry about it.
There's still so much to learn about choline. It only kind of like popped up on the map like in the past 10 years. And the bulk of the research has been funded by companies that make choline supplements. So choline is a B-like vitamin. It's really important for baby's brain development. We know that we need it in pregnancy and while breastfeeding, and really during those periods of rapid brain growth. But there isn't a whole lot of research on it, and some of it's conflicting. Some say that it doesn't really matter what you eat in your diet, that the same levels are maintained in the breast milk. Other studies show that about 50% of pregnant women, regardless of their diet, are not consuming enough choline. And then there's the issue that you talked about, which is this paradox with choline, where we know that it's beneficial for brain growth, but there's also studies in adults showing that consuming choline, choline is transformed by our gut microbiome and then by our liver to this carcinogenic molecule called trimethylamine oxide, TMAO. So what do we do with all this information? Alex and I, we did what we do, and we did a deep dive into the research, and what we've come to our conclusion is that yes, choline may be potentially detrimental, specifically from the food sources that it's found in, animal products, eggs, later in life, due to these associations with TMAO and cardiovascular disease. But it's so important for prenatal health, breastfeeding, and early childhood that we do want to prioritize getting it in your diet, either via whole foods or via supplements. And because of that, a lot of prenatal vitamin makers are now including some choline in their multivitamins. However, it's usually not enough to make any type of dent in your choline intake. Unfortunately, the main message that we're getting from the egg industry and other groups is that really the only way to meet choline needs is by eating animal products. And that's partially true, not entirely true. Eggs are a very good source of choline. They've got about 150 milligrams, and a pregnant woman needs, correct me if I'm getting these numbers wrong off the top of my head, 450 milligrams of choline, and a breastfeeding mama needs about 550. Might be slightly off on those. But right. So you can see how eggs would be a helpful way to meet that. But there's choline widespread in all plant foods, at least small amounts. And certain foods like tofu or soybeans specifically, for example, or wheat germ, are a very good source of choline. What throws a wrench into all of this and complicates is that choline is not a part of, choline amounts in foods have not been integrated very well into the USDA nutrient database. So we actually don't even know the choline content of all foods. So that it makes it really complicated to make recommendations on what foods to eat and what foods don't have choline. We have one chart that was established, I believe it was by some researchers at Chapel Hill, and that's really the only paper that we have that's giving choline amounts. So choline's it makes the whole choline issue very complicated. But in our book, actually, I went through Alex and I went through using all of those amounts and put together a sample meal plan for a 2-year-old that would give you all of the choline that you need in a day entirely from plant foods. And the reassuring information from all of that is because there are small amounts in all plant foods, that your kid is likely getting enough. And as a form of insurance during pregnancy and breastfeeding, we do recommend that strict plant-based moms supplement with about half of the RDA for choline. But again, it's just like anything else. You're taking that multivitamin as a form of insurance, and it's not based on whether you're a plant-based eater or you're an omnivore. It's all women should be taking a little bit extra as a form of insurance.
Got it. So from what you have seen in the research and what we have available for choline amounts, we should be able to get enough, or the little toddler should be able to get enough choline from plants.
Yes, but we recommend prioritizing soy foods because those are currently the best plant-based source that we know of. Mm-hmm. There may be other really good sources, and we just haven't sussed those out just yet.
Yeah, I think our bottom line is that, look, we know that choline is such a critical nutrient for brain development. It's why it's prioritized so much in pregnancy and lactation. We would assume then, in sort of the early infancy, early toddlerhood years, that it's also important, but we don't see any reason, any evidence to why we should supplement during that. You can just focus on getting it through food sources. And like Whitney said, it's another reason that we like soy milk as sort of the best option after formula or breast milk, just because of lots of reasons, but also because it does contain choline and the other plant-based milks out there don't.
And there's really no research on choline deficiency in children. So there's nothing that we can go off of right now to make definitive recommendations other than just saying, try to eat a varied plant-based diet that includes soy foods.
And I just want to clarify this too, because sometimes we'll get a follow-up question where we do not recommend choline supplementation at this point for any adult except for pregnancy or lactation. And like Whitney said, that's because of that TMAO consideration. So we don't think there's enough evidence to show that, but sort of in those specific periods of time, we think that there is enough pros to say, this is sort of a window where supplementation is likely a good option. We both did it. We recommend doing it. But then after you've weaned your child off, then you can stop. And we don't recommend continuing it.
Yeah, the benefits outweigh the risks during that time period.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Okay, so the next one is vitamin A. I'm really confused about this. So everybody's getting really upset about vitamin A and how plant-based eaters aren't converting enough and all of this stuff. So please explain this to me. Because one thing I know as a pediatrician is that when babies start to eat complementary foods, especially when they're eating sweet potatoes and carrots, they all turn orange and they get carotenoemia. It seems to me like they're absorbing beta carotene. So, I mean, like, that's just my common sense, but I might be wrong. So tell me about vitamin A. Do we need to be concerned if we're plant-based that we're not getting enough intake of that?
Well, there was a recent study about vegan kids with the concern that despite I believe they thought they were getting the adequate intake based on food frequency questionnaires, and then their serum levels were not reflecting that. And so they were concerned about whether they were converting it. I think the problem with that study is, I'm not saying to discount food frequency questionnaires. They're our number one, they're the most widely used assessment tool in many nutrition research studies. But I think the issue, especially when it comes to kids, is that what we think our kid is eating and what we say our kid is eating or what the daycare center reports your child ate may not match up with reality. And in that study specifically, this was based in a bunch of daycare centers. So it's likely that the caretakers were saying, oh, we served carrots at lunch. We serve 4 carrots, and it's a very small amount of foods that are rich in carotenoids, which are what converts to provitamin A in the body. You need a very small amount to meet your needs. So it's likely that a daycare center could report that a child had 2 baby carrots, and that's enough to say they met their needs, when in reality, maybe the kid didn't eat the baby carrots at all. So I feel like that could be one of the issues with that particular study, because it's actually contradictory to what the research shows and what the DRIs were actually based upon, was that enough of these precursors to vitamin A, these carotenoids, if you eat them in the correct amounts, that they will convert to the active vitamin A in the body just the same. They will convert in the breast milk, and that there's really not a biological need for active retinol. So my long-winded way of saying that, yes, if you are eating these vitamin A carotenoid-rich plants, like your sweet potatoes, like your carrots, persimmons, basically anything that's this really brightly colored red and orange fruits or vegetables, and also leafy greens, that you will make enough vitamin A. There's a caveat here, however. A lot of kids, and in the toddler ages, maybe when you're not feeding them with a spoon and feeding them their sweet potatoes or their carrot puree, they might actually not eat any of those things in the day. There's so many days when my son does not touch a vegetable, most days. And so you do kind of have to be a little bit cognizant of that. So once you realize that that's an issue, it's really easy to get around. So like I said, just a 4th cup of any of those brightly colored orange fruits or vegetables, like the carrot, the sweet potato, the pumpkin, that can meet your kids' needs for the day. So knowing that, we highlighted carotenoids on our PB3 plate. Our PB3 plate is a plate model that we created for parents that they can visually represents how to properly plan a plant-based plate, and you can download that for free on our website. And carotenoids are a call-out item in the fruits and vegetables section. So if you're providing a wide array of those things, it's likely that your child will easily meet their needs. You just have to you just have to kind of be thinking about it. So swirl a little pumpkin in their oatmeal, make some sweet potato fries for lunch if they like them.
Mango is a good source of vitamin A, which a lot of kids tend to like. You can add that to smoothies with carrots to make sort of like a sunshine, smoothie. So
it isn't hard, and especially for an adult, it's just a no-brainer. If you're eating a plant-based diet, you're probably getting it because most adults have a wider palate than a child.
Well, and I just want to say once again, if you sort of look at an omnivore diet, vitamin A is added to cow's milk. It doesn't naturally occur there. So, we're adding this in, and that's where a lot of kids get it. And so you'll hear things like, oh, well, you're not getting enough vitamin A. Well, yeah, but they're getting it from a fortified source as well. So, we sort of are food first and like to sort of say that it is so abundant in so many plant-based foods, and just offering them to your child often and figuring out the ones that, he really likes or she likes and eats often is sort of what we recommend.
Yeah. And then just going back to what you said earlier, Whitney, about how nutrition science is young. And there's a lot of things that I feel as a pediatrician, because I look at things in a big picture, right? So whenever this vitamin A thing came up, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, what does vitamin A deficiency even look like? Like, what's going on here?
What does it look like? It looks like blindness. Do we have a bunch
that's not happening? Like,
kids in the
it's
US
just not
that are
happening.
blind?
So, well, at
we
least
don't see
in
it
my
except
patients that eat this way, and so I guess part of it too is taking a step back and realizing sometimes that we do sometimes get into this microscopic, theoretical, we're trying to do our best. And then going back to, if your child is really getting very selective and in your mama heart that they're just down to like 5 foods and they refuse to eat anything else, we may have a problem there. But if your child generally eats a variety of foods, even if they're not eating something orange every single day, then it's probably okay when it comes to some of these, especially that we don't have that much information about, because really I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, it's fat soluble. I mean, it's not something that you have to make sure you're eating every single day, like, and again, I don't want any parent to listen to this and be like, oh my gosh, my kid hasn't eaten kale or sweet potato in 2 years. Like it's not about focusing so much on, I mean, these nutrients are important, right? We're not going to discount that, but we don't want you to be obsessed or take out your calculator for every meal and put everything that your child eats in a chronometer and figure out like that's not what we do, and we're dietitians, and we definitely don't recommend that unless you feel like you're really trying to assess something for a specific period of time. But for the general time period, and that's just not something that we'd ever recommend doing.
Yeah. It's totally a balance. I think being aware, learning the information, knowing what's important, what we have to be mindful about, but also at the other end, not micromanaging, right? So it's like this constant balance of life and motherhood. So, but that gives me lots of information going forward. So I appreciate that. So when it comes to specific micronutrients that you recommend supplementing for the average plant-based family, what would those be?
So we have a free supplement guide on our website, and I preface this sort of answer by saying that because if anyone's listening to this, you don't have to sort of get out your pen and paper. We have a guide that goes into all of this, the different dosing recommendations based on age, and then also our favorite products. None of that is sponsored. It's just really a sort of, hey, this is what sort of meets our standards. These are the ones that we like. And also these are the ones that are 100% plant-based, because for certain nutrients like vitamin D, for example, it can be hard to find an option that is going to be safe for an infant that's also not lanolin based, which is the animal derived source. So we recommend vitamin D for all exclusively breastfed babies. That is what the AAP recommends. And again, if we think back to sort of how we were once upon a time, we were outside. We were converting vitamin D through our skin, and we're just not doing that anymore. And I say that because sometimes we'll get questions from parents who will say, gosh, that doesn't seem natural to have to supplement my child right from birth. And it's because, again, we don't live these natural lives that we once did. It does not mean that your breast milk is insufficient. It just means that you're not putting your baby outside, half naked for a good part of the day to get enough vitamin D that they need. So supplementing 400 IUs of vitamin D that first year. If you're breastfeeding, The AAP also does recommend considering iron supplementation sort of before you start solids. And again, the reason is because our iron stores are built up in utero and they start to decline around 4 to 6 months of age. We start to introduce solids around there, but if your baby's having a hard time eating perhaps or isn't catching on to starting solids, you may want to consider talking to your pediatrician about an iron supplement to help boost that level. And then if you're formula fed, they will get the iron they need through that source. And then after one, the nutrients we're really concerned about specifically for plant-based eaters are B12. B12 is only reliably found in animal-based foods. It is found in some fortified foods. Our hesitation with recommending a fortified option for that is that, as we just mentioned a few times in this conversation, kids' appetites and preferences change so much. Mm-hmm. Sometimes my kid is scarfing down smoothies and other times he doesn't want any milk. Well, if I was only relying on the B12 in that fortified milk product, there are some days where he just wouldn't get enough. And so we just think it's sort of a more conservative option to offer B12 daily. There is some good enough research, I would say, to say that we feel comfortable recommending, adults to sort of supplement with larger doses weekly or biweekly, but we just don't have enough of that evidence for kids, and therefore we recommended daily supplementation of B12. Vitamin D continuously. Again, you can find that in fortified foods, but depending on how much milk perhaps your child is drinking, you may not be able to get enough depending on the brand. The other thing we do recommend is half the RDA of iodine. And again, if we think about where iodine is typically found in an omnivore diet, it is in milk, but it's not naturally occurring. The reason iodine is there is because of the way that we sterilize the milk udders and the equipment that we use to milk cows. And that iodized solution gets into the milk. So it's not naturally occurring, but that's how it gets in there. And that's how most omnivore children get enough iodine. Iodine is also found in better amounts in seafood. But if you're not eating either of those things, then we do recommend half the RDA of iodine. And that's